All right, so we're diving deep today into the Renaissance and the Reformation, back to Europe between 1400 and 1700. Talk about a time of massive change, right? And looking at the sources you've given us, I'm already hooked. It's like watching Europe wake up after a really long nap and just decide, hey, let's reinvent ourselves.
It really is a period of just dramatic shifts,
Mhm.
art, science, religion, everything. And the crazy thing is these changes, they didn't stay put in Europe. It's like they rippled outwards and ended up influencing, well, the whole world.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Yeah.
Renaissance, we hear that word, and it means rebirth, right?
Right.
But what exactly was being reborn here? I mean, Europe's fresh out of the Middle Ages, and let's be real, that wasn't exactly the most cheerful time.
You're not wrong. The Middle Ages had their fair share of feudalism, war, not to mention the plague. But even amidst all that turmoil, you can see the seeds of change, right? The Renaissance was about rediscovering all that classical knowledge and culture, think ancient Greece and Rome, but it was also about rejecting, those rigid hierarchies of the medieval world.
So it's like Europe saying, we're done with the old ways, time for a do-over, and it all seems to kick off in Italy. Why Italy? What was going on there?
Well, Italy had this unique position, you see. It was a crossroads for trade. These wealthy cities like Florence, they were magnets attracting merchants and scholars from all over. And that influx of wealth, and even more so ideas, it created the perfect breeding ground for, well, new ways of thinking.
And when we talk Florence, we can't forget the Medici family, right? They were like the Renaissance version of like angel investors funding all these artists and thinkers left and right.
Exactly. The Medici, they were patrons of the arts for sure,
Yeah.
but they weren't just throwing money around. These were savvy political players, people who understood that image, that innovation that was power. Their patronage helped create a space where artists like, well, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, they could really thrive.
Da Vinci. Now, this is a name that just screams Renaissance, doesn't it? Painter, inventor, scientist. This guy was like determined to master everything. What is it about him that still fascinates us today?
Da Vinci is like the ultimate Renaissance man, right?
Uh,
He's brilliant in so many areas, driven by this endless curiosity. His paintings, like, the Mona Lisa, they're still celebrated for their realism, for how deeply they seem to understand human nature. And then you look at his notebooks filled with sketches of flying machines and anatomical studies. It's like he wanted to figure out everything about the world around him.
it's mind-blowing that one person could be so talented in so many different fields.
Hmm.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, let's talk about this idea of humanism. It seems like such a huge shift from that medieval mindset. So what's at the core of this new way of thinking?
Humanism. It was this philosophical movement that put, well, humans right at the center of intellectual inquiry. It was all about human potential, reason, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, a real departure from that medieval focus on divine authority and the afterlife.
So it's like saying, hey, we're human, and that's something to be excited about. We can learn, create, shape our own destinies. That's pretty empowering, isn't it?
Absolutely. Humanism wasn't just some abstract philosophy. It had a huge impact on education. Instead of rote memorization and religious dogma, the humanists, they pushed for a well-rounded education. Literature, history, philosophy, the arts, it was all about cultivating critical thinking and preparing people to be, active citizens.
Quite a contrast to that medieval system where the church basically controlled education,
Yeah.
and it was all about, religious training. But this focus on human reason, on observation, it didn't just change philosophy and education. It sparked a revolution in science too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't talk about the Renaissance without mentioning, well, Copernicus and Galileo.
Oh, absolutely. These guys challenged this idea that had been around forever, the idea that Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus, he comes along and proposes this heliocentric model, the sun's at the center. And then Galileo, using his telescope, he makes all these observations that actually back up this radical new theory.
And it wasn't just about astronomy, was it? It was about questioning everything we thought we knew, daring to see the world differently, even if it meant going against, the church's teachings. Talk about brave.
Galileo's fight with the church is a perfect example of that tension, that clash between science and religious dogma that was happening back then. Really highlights how that Renaissance spirit of inquiry, it often meant challenging the authorities.
Okay, and here's where things get really, really interesting, I think. Imagine the printing press coming along right at this time of all these radical new ideas. Before, books were handwritten, super expensive, only a few people could even get their hands on them. Then, bam! Ideas are spreading like wildfire thanks to mass production.
The printing press, it changed everything, there's no doubt. Suddenly, you could mass produce information, make knowledge accessible to so many more people. It had this huge impact on literacy rates and the spread of these new ideas. Well, it just exploded.
It was like the internet of its time, right? But unlike the internet, where information can be, well, fleeting, sometimes you don't even know if it's true, printed books had this weight, this permanence.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how that technology shaped how people, consumed and debated information.
It's true. And the printing press, it wasn't just about quantity. Quality mattered too. It meant you could standardize texts, create dictionaries and encyclopedias. It helped develop this shared intellectual culture across Europe.
So it's like the printing press laid the foundation for a society that was more informed, more connected. But we know, having access to information, it doesn't always equal harmony, right? Sometimes it can even lead to conflict. And that brings us to, well, the Reformation.
Right. The Reformation happening at the same time as the Renaissance, it was another huge upheaval. This time in the world of religion, it challenged the Catholic Church, its power, and it led to, well, all these new Protestant denominations popping up.
It's like Europe saying we've rethought art, science, human potential. Now it's religion's turn. But why this sudden urge to challenge the church? It had been the dominant force in Europe for centuries.
There were a few things going on. People were getting more and more dissatisfied with the church, its wealth, its power. It felt like it had gotten too caught up in worldly matters and kind of lost sight of its spiritual purpose.
Sounds like a classic case of power corrupts, right?
Yeah.
But was there something specific that really sparked the Reformation?
One of the big triggers was this practice of selling indulgences. Indulgences were basically, well, pardons for your sins that you can buy from the church. It was supposed to reduce your time in purgatory.
So paying your way out of sin. I could see why people might have some issues with that. And this was the thing that really set Martin Luther off, wasn't it?
You got it. Martin Luther, a German priest, he was outraged by the sale of indulgences. He believed salvation came through faith, through God's grace, not through, rituals or paying off the church.
And that's where those famous 95 Theses come in, right?
Yeah.
The story goes that he nailed his list of complaints, his criticisms, right to the door of a church in Wittenberg. Boom. A theological debate that would sweep across Europe.
Exactly. Those 95 Theses, they were a direct challenge to the church's authority. Luther argued the Bible, that was the ultimate source of religious truth. And he said people should be able to interpret it themselves without priests or, anyone else telling them what to think.
Hold on. So he's basically saying, you don't need the church to tell you what to believe. Read the Bible, figure it out for yourself. I mean, that's pretty revolutionary for the time, isn't it?
It was radical, and even more so because of, well, you guessed it, the printing press. Luther's ideas, his translation of the Bible into German, it spread like wildfire across Europe, and that's how the religious revolution began.
It's like the printing press was the Reformation's secret weapon. But before we get too deep into all of that, let's take a moment to process. We've gone from the rebirth of art and science to this challenge to religious authority. It's wild to think how all these seemingly separate events were happening at the same time, shaping Europe in such a profound way.
Welcome back. So we've been digging into the Renaissance and the Reformation, and wow, these two movements really shook things up in Europe. I gotta say, my head is spinning with all these new ideas.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But it's really amazing how these movements, they started centuries ago, but they still resonate with us, even today. That's what I find so incredible. We're talking art, science, religion stuff that happened, hundreds of years ago? But it feels like the Renaissance and Reformation, they're still shaping our world in so many ways.
Oh, absolutely. Their legacy, it's like woven into the fabric of modern society, from our values and institutions to how we understand, well, everything around us.
Okay, so let's try to untangle this legacy a bit. Where do we see the biggest fingerprints of the Renaissance and Reformation today?
Well, let's start with humanism. That emphasis on human potential, reason, individual worth. It didn't just vanish when the Renaissance ended, It became this cornerstone of Western thought, influencing everything from education to politics.
So you're saying that our focus today on things like individual rights, freedom of expression, even the pursuit of happiness, all of that has its roots in this Renaissance idea of humanism.
Exactly. Think about our education systems. They're built on this idea that everyone has the potential to learn and grow, that education should be about critical thinking, about preparing people to be, well, active citizens. It's a direct link back to humanist thought.
That's such a huge change from the medieval system where, like we said, the church basically ran education and it was all about, religious dogma. It's amazing how that shift in thinking has had such a lasting impact. What about science? We talked about the scientific method taking shape during the Renaissance. So how has that approach shaped the world we live in today?
The scientific method, that systematic way of observing, experimenting, coming to evidence-based conclusions, that's the foundation of modern science. It's how we've made these incredible advances in, well, medicine, technology, engineering, you name it.
So basically, from the smartphones we use to the medicines that keep us healthy, we can kind of thank the Renaissance for getting the ball rolling.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
In a way, yes. That Renaissance spirit of inquiry, that willingness to challenge what we think we know and test ideas, that's what still drives scientific progress today.
Okay, so we've traced humanism and science from the Renaissance to today. What about the Reformation? It's easy to see its impact on religion,
Yeah.
but did it leave a mark on other parts of our world too?
The Reformation, it had a huge impact on how religious freedom developed, and that by extension influenced the rise of democratic ideals. Remember, the reformers, they challenged the Catholic Church, this absolute authority. They argued that people had the right to interpret scripture for themselves, practice their faith according to their own conscience.
So it wasn't just about breaking away from the Catholic Church, but about this right to think for yourself, to choose your own beliefs.
Exactly. And that principle, freedom of conscience, it's become a cornerstone of modern democracies. Think about the U.S. Bill of Rights. It guarantees freedom of religion.
Wow, so it's like the Reformation accidentally planted the seeds for religious tolerance and even these broader democratic principles. Who knew that a theological debate could have such a huge impact?
Right. It just shows how connected ideas are and how a seemingly small change in thinking can have these massive ripple effects throughout history.
Speaking of ripple effects, we can't forget the Reformation's impact on literacy and education. We talked about how the reformers wanted people to read the Bible for themselves, which led to more schools and a rise in literacy rates. How does that connect to us today?
Well, think about how much emphasis we put on education today. It's seen as this fundamental right, essential for individual growth and for society to function. That focus on universal education, it has roots in the Reformation's push for biblical literacy.
So from these groundbreaking scientific discoveries to the ideas of individual liberty and even the value we put on education, it's clear the Renaissance and Reformation left a huge mark on our world. Pretty incredible to think that these movements, that they started centuries ago, but they still resonate so strongly today.
It just goes to show that history, it's not just a bunch of old facts and figures. It's a living, breathing story that shapes who we are, how we understand the world. And as we face, the challenges of our time, we can look back at these turning points in history for inspiration, maybe even some guidance.
I love that. I mean, we're living through a time of such rapid technological change, social change, even questioning those long-held beliefs. It's kind of like our own version of the Renaissance and Reformation in a way.
You're exactly right. And just like those movements challenged the old ways of thinking, leading to this explosion of creativity and innovation, we have that same opportunity to shape our future, to build a world that reflects our values, our aspirations.
You mentioned questioning long-held beliefs, and that makes me think about the Catholic Church and how they responded to this whole Protestant upheaval. It's not like they just sat back and watched their authority disappear, right?
Oh, definitely not. The Catholic Church went through this period of really deep self-reflection and reform. It's called the Counter-Reformation. They addressed some of the criticisms the reformers brought up, like, corruption among the clergy, but they also really held on to their core doctrines, and they actively tried to stop the spread of Protestantism.
So it was this time of internal reform, but also external conflict for the church. Must have been a pretty wild time for everyone involved. And how did this whole power struggle between the Catholic Church and the Protestant reformers, how did that play out in the political landscape of Europe?
Well, the decline of the Catholic Church's authority, it played a huge role in the rise of nation-states. As monarchs and princes started to assert their independence from the Pope's control, they were able to consolidate their power and form alliances based on, well, politics, not just religion.
It's like we're watching the map of Europe being redrawn right in front of us. Religious and political forces, they're clashing, changing the whole balance of power. It makes you think, what was it like for the everyday person living through all this upheaval? Did they feel stuck in the middle of it all?
It's hard to know exactly what everyone was thinking and feeling, but you can imagine it was a time of huge uncertainty, but also opportunity. People were questioning everything they'd always believed, Traditional authorities were being challenged, new ideas were spreading like wildfire. It was a time of great hope and great fear all mixed together.
As we've been talking about all of this, I keep thinking about the lessons we can learn from the Renaissance and Reformation. There's so many parallels to our own time. This fast pace of change, people questioning authority, everyone searching for meaning in a world that can feel pretty chaotic and uncertain.
You're right. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it definitely rhymes, as they say. And I think there are some really important lessons we can take away from these historical movements, as we try to navigate our own complex world.
So, what are some of those lessons? What can the Renaissance and Reformation teach us about living in a world that's always changing?
Well, one of the big ones is the importance of embracing change, and questioning what we assume to be true. The Renaissance and Reformation, they came about because people were willing to challenge the status quo, to seek out new knowledge, to imagine different ways of living in the world.
This is saying, don't be afraid to question things. Don't just blindly accept what you've been told. Think for yourself. And that's such a crucial message today, especially when we're overwhelmed with information all the time.
Absolutely. Critical thinking, it's more important now than ever. We have to be able to tell fact from fiction, to look at different perspectives, to form our own well-informed opinions. Another lesson is about the power of individual action. Think about Martin Luther nailing those 95 theses to the door, or Galileo standing up to the church and saying, "No, this is how the universe actually works." Individuals can make a difference even when it seems like they're facing impossible odds.
It's inspiring to think about that.
Yeah.
That even these small acts of courage, of conviction, they can have an impact that reaches far beyond our own time and place. It makes me think about all the people who were part of these movements. The artists, the scientists, the reformers, the everyday people who embraced these new ideas and challenged the old ways of thinking. It must have been such an exciting, such a transformative time to be alive.
It absolutely was. It was this time of such energy. The old order was being challenged. A new world was being born. And that's something we can still relate to today. We're living in a time of huge change, and we have the power to shape the future, just like the people of the Renaissance and Reformation did.
It's both exciting and a bit scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think we have the ability to actually influence the course of history. But it also makes you think about the responsibility that comes with that power.
Yeah.
We have to learn from the mistakes of the past, from the religious wars, the persecution that happened during both the Renaissance and Reformation.
That's so important. Tolerance, empathy, understanding those are crucial if we want to create a world that's more just, more equitable.
Yeah.
We have to remember that progress, it's not just about technology or economic growth. It's about building a society where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Well said. We've covered so much in this deep dive, but I think the biggest takeaway is that history, it's not just a bunch of dusty facts and figures. It's a living, breathing story that can teach us, inspire us, even guide us as we face the challenges and opportunities of our own time.
And who knows, maybe centuries from now, people will look back at our era and try to figure out what shaped their world, just like we're doing with the Renaissance and Reformation.
Whoa, that's a pretty mind-blowing thought. To think that we're part of this ongoing story, this grand human experiment. A huge thank you to you for joining us on this epic deep dive. It's been awesome exploring these fascinating historical movements with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listener, thank you for bringing these amazing sources to us. It's been a real privilege to dive deep into this material with you. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring this amazing tapestry of history. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Renaissance and Reformation. Man, it's been quite a journey so far, wouldn't you say? We've seen how these movements completely changed art, science, religion, politics. We've even connected them to, our world today.
It really is amazing how stuff that happened centuries ago can still feel so relevant, so important to understanding who we are now.
I know. It's like we're discovering all these hidden links between the past and the present. But before we wrap things up, I think we should talk about the fact that the Renaissance and Reformation weren't, all perfect and happy. There were some dark sides to these movements too, right?
Oh, definitely. Progress, it almost always comes at a price, and the Renaissance and Reformation were no different. Those religious wars that ripped through Europe, that clash between Catholics and Protestants, it's a pretty harsh reminder that even the best ideas can have consequences that we don't expect, consequences that can be really bad.
It's like this huge surge of creativity and intellectual freedom, it also unleashed these powerful forces of conflict and division. And speaking of conflict, what about the Catholic Church? How did they react to all of this? They didn't just sit around and watch their power fade away, did they?
No way. The Catholic Church, they went through this really intense period of like soul searching and reform. It's called the Counter-Reformation. They addressed some of the issues that the reformers had brought up, like, the corruption among the clergy. But at the same time, they doubled down on their core beliefs and really tried to stop Protestantism from spreading.
So for the church, it was this time of internal reform, but also all this conflict with the outside world. Must have been a pretty crazy time for everyone involved. So how did all this power struggle between the Catholic Church and these Protestant reformers, how did that impact, the political landscape of Europe?
The Catholic Church losing some of its authority. That had a huge impact on the rise of nation states. As kings and princes started to flex their muscles a bit, break free from the Pope's control, they could consolidate their power, make alliances based on politics, not just religion anymore.
It's like we're watching the map of Europe being redrawn right in front of us. You've got these religious and political forces clashing, changing the whole balance of power. It makes you wonder, what was it like for the average person back then? Living through all this upheaval, did they feel like they were, caught in the middle of this tug of war?
It's impossible to say for sure what everyone was thinking or feeling back then, but you can imagine it was a time of so much uncertainty, but also possibility. Think about it. They're questioning everything they've always believed. The authorities are being challenged. New ideas are flying around everywhere. It was a time of great hope, but also, a lot of fear, all mixed together.
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about what lessons we can learn from the Renaissance and Reformation. I mean, there are so many similarities to our world today, right? The crazy speed of change, people questioning authority, this constant search for meaning in a world that often feels so chaotic and uncertain.
Absolutely. They say history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it definitely rhymes. And I think there's some really powerful lessons we can take away from these moments in history, lessons that can help us as we navigate our own complex world.
So what are some of those lessons? What can the Renaissance and Reformation teach us about how to live in a world that's constantly changing?
One of the big ones is being open to change, and not just accepting everything we've been told as the absolute truth. The Renaissance and Reformation, they were all about challenging the status quo, seeking out new knowledge, and imagining new ways of being in the world.
It's like saying, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't just take things at face value. Think for yourself.
Yeah.
That's such an important message today, especially with information overload happening all the time.
It's true. Critical thinking, it's more important now than ever. We need to be able to sort through all the noise, figure out what's true, what's not, to look at things from different angles and to form our own opinions based on facts and evidence. Another big lesson is about individual action. Think about Martin Luther nailing those 95 theses to the church door, or Galileo basically telling the church, nope, you're wrong about how the universe works. Individuals can make a difference, even when it seems like they're up against impossible odds.
It's really inspiring to think about that even these seemingly small acts of courage, of standing up for what you believe in, they can have an impact that goes way beyond, our own time and place. It makes me think about all those people who are part of these movements, the artists, the scientists, the reformers, just the everyday people who embrace these new ideas and challenge the old ways of doing things. Man, what a transformative time to be alive.
It really was. It was this period of such incredible energy and change. The old order was crumbling and this new world was being born. And that's something that we can still connect with today. We're living in a time of huge change, and we have the chance to shape the future just like the people of the Renaissance and Reformation did.
It's both exciting and a bit overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that we can actually, have a hand in shaping history. But it also makes you realize the responsibility that comes with that. We have to learn from the mistakes that were made back then. You know? The religious wars, the persecution, those are dark chapters in both the Renaissance and Reformation.
You're right. Tolerance, empathy, understanding, those are so important if we want to build a better world, a more just world. We have to remember that progress isn't just about technology or the economy. It's about creating a society where everyone has the chance to succeed, to be happy,
That's a great point. We've talked about so much in this deep dive, but I think the most important thing to remember is that history, it's not just some collection of old facts and dates. It's a living story, one that can teach us so much, inspire us, and even, guide us as we face our own challenges and try to make the most of the opportunities that we have.
And who knows, maybe hundreds of years from now, people will be looking back at our time, trying to understand what shaped their world, just like we're doing now with the Renaissance and Reformation.
Wow, that's an incredible thought that we're all part of this ongoing story. This is this huge human experiment. Well, a huge thank you to you for joining us on this incredible journey. It's been amazing exploring these fascinating parts of history with you.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for bringing us these amazing sources. It's been a real privilege to dive deep into this material with you. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive and that it's, sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring the incredible story of history.